First, I'd like to say good morning or good afternoon to everyone. Before we even begin, I do want to tell the correctional staff that we thank you for the work that you do. I worked with probation and parole in Missouri for 32 years and continue to work with prisoner reentry programs. And this is hard work, and this is difficult work. And the appreciation that I have for correctional staff and the work that they do is unbinding. And so first, I'd like to thank you for all that you do with that. As I talk about AA in the United States and Canada, we are not the authorities on what is done. We have things that we have put into place, practices that we've put into place that have worked well in some areas and have not worked well in others. And so what I'm bringing is the experience that we have in the United States. We are not the experts in anything, as you probably well know by now. And so how do we cooperate? How do prisons and jails cooperate with administration and AA? We follow the rules. When individual members of the fellowship go into the prisons, the rules of an institution, of a prison or jail, are there for the safety and security. And so we follow those rules, and we do what is asked of us by the administration and the jail officials. Most of the meetings that I am aware of, again, we're not experts on this, but most of the meetings in prisons and jails are open meetings. And so anyone is welcome to attend that meeting. Anyone who identifies as being alcoholic or thinks they may be alcoholic has the opportunity to attend a meeting within a prison. There are some prisons that will have treatment programs within the prison itself. Some of those meetings may be closed meetings where you will not have anyone who can attend, but only those who identify as alcoholic and attend a closed meeting. But prison officials are sometimes do not always understand the value that AA can bring to a prison or an institution. AA teaches people to live a new life and teaches people to live a program of honesty and to do a self-examination in terms of what they have done and where they want their life to be in respect to the 12 steps, but also in terms of how they live their life. And so for that to occur within a prison setting can be very life-changing for an individual. When people go to prison, I believe that they make a silent promise to themselves that life will be different, that they will do things differently. And oftentimes they do not know how to do things differently. They have not been taught that. And so for those individuals that attend AA meetings within a prison, AA teaches a new way of life. It teaches a way in which individuals can live differently and live differently within the prison, but even more importantly or equally important, to live differently when they leave the prison and they live within the community. Each prison will have a different schedule that they will allow for AA meetings to occur. Oftentimes what happens is there is a problem with group meeting space within a prison or a jail setting, and so the members of the fellowship who work within the prisons, who bring meetings into the prisons, have to work with the prison officials to make sure that the group room is available. Again, space within a prison or jail can be limited, and so they look to see what times and rooms are available in order for those meetings to occur, and to occur in a place that is considered to be private and confidential. Oftentimes it is the inmates who make the request for a group to begin. Oftentimes, too, members of the fellowship will contact prison administrators and let them know that they're willing to bring a meeting into a prison. And so it's usually that joint combination of an inmate expressing a concern for it or expressing a need, and then members of the fellowship expressing a desire to do service work within the prison. And so it's generally that combination that will allow for that to happen. There have been times also when prison officials have requested a meeting to be available in the prison, independent of all of that. 2 years ago, there was a warden from a facility that was in a very remote area who said he had no meetings in his prison and wanted a meeting to be started, and reached out to the AA community to help him begin that meeting within the prison. We don't have numbers in terms of the number of people who attend AA meetings. Oftentimes what will happen is inmates may wish to go to an AA meeting because they're bored, because they want to get out of their cell, because you may have great coffee in the meeting. You may have a snack in the meeting, which is much better than the food they eat somewhere else. Or they may think that it will enhance their ability to make parole status, that it will help them get out of jail or prison faster. But oftentimes what happens is when they go into the meeting, whatever their initial reason for it may be, whether it's to find true sobriety or because they are bored, AA plants a seed. And AA, the message that people bring into the prison is a message of strength, hope, and experience. And so with that, people can identify with that. And once they begin to identify and share, then they become more engaged within the fellowship process. Oftentimes, many of the meetings are chaired by outside members, members who, again, they are screened by the jail. They have to go through a screening process and then approved to come into the prison and do the AA meeting there. That is the lifeline for a meeting, is for an individual who does service within the prison to bring that meeting in there. Of all the service work that individuals have the opportunity to do, those that bring meetings into a prison, they bring hope, and they bring a belief that life can be different than what it is. Oftentimes inmates become numbers, and that's who they begin to identify with, and they lose their name within a prison setting. What AA does is AA gives an individual back their name within a prison. And AA does something that nobody else does, is they ask them to come back. And nobody asks these individuals to come back. AA does that. And so my brother, who was in recovery, did service work and brought meetings into a prison. And for him, it was the most valuable type of service work that he did. And for those individuals that were in his group in that prison setting, that was their hour and a half of sharing and believing that life can and would be different. Sponsorship can be a little bit difficult within a prison, and you may have, it's a very personal thing in terms of who you identify as your sponsor and who you work with. You may have some inmates who will ask another inmate to be their sponsor. Hopefully it's someone that has had some sobriety and has an understanding of the steps and can help them work the steps. But oftentimes there may be sponsors who are on the outside. In the United States and Canada, we have the Correctional Correspondence Service. And so an individual in prison can request to write to someone on the outside. And while that may not be their sponsor per se, it is someone that they can communicate in written form in terms of questions and help and assistance in terms of working within the fellowship. Oftentimes, again, each prison has their own rules and regulations, but oftentimes inmates cannot attend outside meetings. And that's because they're incarcerated and they are not allowed to leave the facility. There are some places where they may have transitional halfway houses, where an individual will go and stay in that facility for a short period of time before they go back to their home. If they are in a transitional facility where they have the ability to leave and go to work, if they have permission and approval from the director of the facility, they may be able to attend an outside AA meeting. I'm not really aware of that. I mean, I could not imagine so. I mean, what AA teaches people is a new way of life, and it's a program of honesty. And sometimes within prison settings, there can be some manipulation, and it's not the most pleasant place to be. But I don't think that there would be any issues with that. This again is up to the prison officials. You will have some prison administrators who will not allow former inmates to re-enter the prison at all. You may have some prison administrators who allow people to re-enter the prison after they have been released for 5 years. And so again, it is up to each prison in terms of how they do that. But in terms of carrying the message, for an individual to hear the message of AA from someone who has walked in their shoes is very powerful. I worked a lot with probation and parole, and so we do not have the same rules and regulations as the prisons do. And so we would host AA education sessions in our probation and parole office, and we would allow individuals who have been in prison or who were on probation and parole to serve as a speaker or to chair that meeting or to educate new participants, new people who were placed on probation and parole. And again, it's someone who has walked in their shoes, whose story is very similar to theirs in terms of they started drinking, they got in trouble, they ended up in court, they ended up in jail, they ended up in probation, but that there was life beyond that AA offered hope and an experience that they could relate to and again, live life differently. Absolutely, yes. And generally, women bring the meetings into the facilities for women inmates. Again, it depends on the institution and the rules of the institution, and it also, they work in collaboration with the corrections community. So that the corrections committee for the local AA area supports that, then that can happen. But again, that's a decision that the local AA community makes, and then the prison certainly has the ability to approve or disapprove. AA can do a world of good to help enhance rehabilitation programs. As I said, I worked with probation and parole for 32 years, and I saw a lot of people go in treatment and out of treatment and back and forth. To me, true sobriety did not begin until someone began to attend an AA meeting. Treatment, and anybody can do a treatment program. It's 30 days or 35 days or whatever the length of the program is. But it is within an AA meeting that people have to begin to live the steps, and they have to begin to work the steps, and they have to begin to incorporate it into their lives. So AA can certainly enhance in 1,000 ways. For an AA meeting to be run in a prison alcohol unit or rehabilitation unit, it's a way for someone to also understand how they put what they've learned into work and to examine what are they doing and how are they doing it. It is not just limited to prisons, probation and parole. In the United States, a lot of people have an opportunity to be on probation before they go to prison. For AA to be incorporated into an individual's rehabilitation plan while on probation can again help them learn how to live their lives, that they do not end up in a prison setting. I always believe that the earlier the intervention can occur and the earlier we can do our work, hopefully we have better outcomes. And what our goal is for people to be civil, sober, and contributing. AA can have a big role in that and a big part in that. And to be able to do that early on, no matter where the individual is within the criminal justice process, can help them. Oftentimes the literature is purchased by the local corrections committee, and or the area will take up a collection for big books, for literature, for grapevine magazines, and then they are given to the prison to distribute. It can be placed in the library. It can be placed in the hands of the caseworkers. It can be placed in the hands of the wardens. It can be placed in the hands of anyone who has contact with that individual, with the individuals within the prison setting. And so again, a lot of times it's the local committees, the local areas that will raise the money for that. You have some prisons who will buy big books to add to their library, but oftentimes there may not be money available for that within the prison system. So a lot of that is dependent upon the local committees to do that fundraising for that. A bulletin specifically for inmates, and it is called Sharing from Behind the Walls. And so those are the stories that are collected by those individuals who are behind the walls, and then is able to be distributed in that form or fashion. We also, in the Grapevine magazine, the July issue is the inmate issue. It's the prison issue. And so that also, the stories are the stories from those individuals who are behind the walls. I don't know that I have the answer in terms of how AA members are motivated to bring meetings behind the walls. But as I said earlier, of all the service work that an individual can do, if I was in the shoes of a member of the fellowship and I looked at all the opportunities of the type of service work that can be done, prison would probably not be the top of my list, because it's the unknown, and because prisons can be difficult to work with. Prisons are rule-driven, and we have the rules change as the day changes and as administrators change. As AA has rotation, so do prisons have rotation. They rotate in terms of wardens, and they rotate in terms of caseworkers and staff who don't understand what AA is. But when you look at the value that AA has in terms of bringing a meeting to an individual behind the walls, as I said earlier, when you're in prison, your name gets lost and you become a number, and your number is on every single thing that you own, and you even begin to identify yourself as a number. When I worked with probation and parole, we had people who would be off parole supervision for years, and they would call looking for information, and they would give you their name, and they immediately followed up by their number, and that's who they became. And so when AA walks into a prison and they bring a meeting into a prison, they bring hope, and they bring a belief that life can be different. And again, when an individual walks into an AA meeting, they're called by their name and not their number. And you are asked to come back. And again, when you're a prisoner and you walk out, nobody asks you to come back. They want you to go away. But AA does not do that, and they do not judge, and they do not dart the eyes when you start to ask questions or start to share, but they help you, and they give you a hand and let you know that life can be different. Why do I believe in AA? So I am the daughter of an alcoholic, and I am the sister of an alcoholic. And when my brother tried to get sober, he tried many different times, and he would be in and out of prison, or not in and out of prison, he'd be in and out of jails, and he would be arrested for DWIs. He would lose jobs. He went into the military. He got kicked out of the military. He would do a number of things, and what would end up happening is he would try to get sober, and he couldn't get sober. And when he walked into an AA meeting, he was usually the last in the room and the first out the door. And he did not participate in the fellowship. He didn't participate in service. He didn't have a sponsor. He didn't use his sponsor as the sponsor was intended to be used. And so when he went back into treatment the last time and went back into AA, I thought, same old, same old. And this is also when I was working with probation and parole, and I would send people to AA meetings without realizing what I was doing and why I was doing it. But when Michael went back into AA, again, for the first time out of 50 times, and began to work the steps, I began to see the change in his life. And I began to see how he lived life differently. We would have family holidays, and normally he would be there for the entire evening. This time it was different. He had to leave at 7 o'clock because he had to get to the meeting to set up the chairs and to make sure the coffee was made. And we sat and we waited and we watched. And we saw how he lived his life differently and saw the spirituality that had once been gone re-enter his life. And he began to sponsor people, and he began to bring meetings into a prison. And it was at that point that I realized I needed to look at how I worked with AA and what I did, and how I wanted my clients, the individuals I worked with, to do differently and to use AA to help them do better. And because I saw how Michael had changed, then I realized I had to change. And I had to change how I worked with AA and how I help support AA in my clients' sobriety. If I wanted them to have true sobriety and not just sobriety to make me happy, then I had to understand how AA worked and how to do it differently. And so that's what brought me to work with AA differently, is the change that I saw in my brother and how he lived his life. And so that was the gift that AA had given him. They had given him his life back. And so because of that, I had to work differently and do differently. I would also encourage individuals, if I can add this, I invited AA, because of what I have learned, we invited AA into our probation and parole offices to talk with staff, to teach staff what AA is and what AA is not. What are the different types of meetings? What are the steps? What are the traditions? And what to look for in your client. A lot of times what probation and parole will do is they'll give a client a slip and say, have the group leader, have the group chair sign the slip and bring it back. And a lot of times what probation and parole do is they throw it in a file. What we wanted is AA to teach us how to do things differently than to look at the slip and throw it in a file, to learn how to ask questions, to learn how to support what the sponsor was trying to help that individual with. And so we had done that in terms of bringing AA members in and having them do an education session for our staff. We've also had them do that within the prisons to help teach the correctional staff what AA is and what AA is not.